It started with a sound, something deep and guttural, like the growl of a storm that never reached the sky. I remember standing in the chamber, the kind of place that feels wrong even when nothing's happened yet. The air wasn't heavy, not in the way people say when they're exaggerating. It was worse. It felt alive, like something was pressing against me, pushing just enough to make me aware I was being watched. We all felt it. Our team, the handlers, even the higher-ups who pretended they were fine. But no one said a word. It was easier that way. Easier to pretend nothing was wrong when the thing we'd brought aboard still hadn't woken up. They called it the Apex. Stupid name, really, but it wasn't the kind of thing you argued about when the decision came from people who thought they were untouchable. They didn't see it like we did. They didn't hear the stories from the field, or see the footage of entire outposts reduced to shredded walls and silence. All they cared about was what it could do for us, not against us, for us. I wasn't part of the team that captured it, but I heard enough to piece together what happened. They found it on a dead world. No atmosphere to speak of, no signs of life, nothing. Except it. Sleeping. Or maybe waiting. The retrieval team was proud when they brought it in, strutting around like they'd just won a war. None of them are alive now. Whatever it was they woke up there, it didn't like being taken. By the time the Apex was secured, the survivors weren't even survivors anymore. They were fragments of people who once believed they were untouchable, and yet somehow someone still decided it was worth the risk. The Apex wasn't like anything we'd seen before. It didn't have eyes, at least not in the way we understood, just ridges where its face should have been, like something had sculpted it halfway and given up. Its skin, or whatever that texture was, shifted when you looked at it, not moving, not breathing, just wrong. And the sound it made, that deep, endless growl that felt like it was reaching inside you, pulling at things you didn't even know you had. We were supposed to tame it. That's what they told us anyway. Humanity's ingenuity, adaptability, blah, blah, blah. I wasn't buying it, and neither was anyone else, but orders were orders. They had this whole setup for training it, a sterile white room with walls that could withstand more than we could imagine. The plan was simple. Condition it, teach it to follow commands, and then, somehow, make it fight for us. Against who, they didn't say. Not that it mattered. No one expected the thing to cooperate, except it did. I can still see the moment it happened, that first flicker of understanding, or what we thought was understanding. One of the handlers had been pacing near the observation glass, muttering to himself about protocols. The Apex turned its head, slow and deliberate, and made that sound again. Not the growl, but something sharper, like it was trying to mimic the handler's voice. It didn't work. It wasn't even close. But it was enough to make us realize it wasn't mindless. We should have stopped then. Should have reported it. Shut everything down and left that thing to rot in whatever dark corner of the universe it came from. But curiosity is a nasty thing. We kept going, kept testing, kept pushing. The Apex learned faster than anything we'd ever seen. Not just commands or patterns, but us. It started reacting before we even spoke, like it was reading something beneath the surface, and it was quiet. So quiet that it made the noise we expected from it unbearable when it came. I think that was the worst part, that silence. It wasn't natural, it wasn't waiting. It was observing, calculating. You don't realize how much noise there is in the world until something takes it away. The sound of your breathing, the hum of the walls, the faint buzz of machines. It all felt louder because it wasn't supposed to be the loudest thing. And the Apex knew that. The first time it acted without a command. We thought it was a mistake. One of the droids in the room malfunctioned. Some kind of feedback loop, they said. The Apex crushed it before we even registered what was happening. No hesitation, no apparent reason, just a decisive end. And then it looked at us through the glass, tilting its head like it was waiting for something. That's when I realized we weren't training it. It was training us. We should have shut everything down after the droid. That was the moment we should have realized this wasn't something we could control. But no one wanted to admit it. No one wanted to be the one to say, "We've gone too far." The research was too valuable, they said. The Apex was adapting faster than anything in recorded history. That wasn't failure. It was progress. Or at least, that's what the people in charge kept telling us. Deep down, I think we all knew they were lying. They weren't trying to convince us. They were trying to convince themselves. The next incident wasn't so easy to dismiss. This time, it wasn't a machine. It was one of the handlers, a guy named Ren. He'd been working with the Apex for weeks, always following protocol, always staying behind the observation line. He was cautious, careful, maybe even a little scared. That's why it didn't make sense when it happened. But Ren was in the chamber running a standard diagnostic on the systems. The Apex was still barely even breathing, if you could call it that. Then Ren stopped, just froze in place like something had grabbed him. But there was nothing there. He didn't scream, didn't move. He just stood there, staring at the Apex like he'd seen something none of us could. The rest of us were shouting through the comms, telling him to get out, to respond, to do anything. He didn't. The Apex shifted its head just slightly, and Ren started walking toward it. Not running, not panicked, just walking, like he wasn't in control anymore. The emergency lockdown kicked in before he could get too close, sealing him inside a containment bubble. It didn't matter. By the time we got him out, he was gone. Not dead. Worse. His eyes were blank, his face pale, like whatever made him human had been erased. He didn't speak after that, just sat there, silent, staring at nothing. We called it catatonia, but we knew it wasn't. The Apex had done something to him. We just didn't know what. It was different after that. The Apex stopped reacting to commands, stopped moving altogether. At first we thought it had gone dormant again, like it had when they found it. But it wasn't dormant. It was watching. Not in the way a predator watches its prey, but like it was waiting for us to make a mistake. And we did. The Apex didn't need to break out. That's the thing. We built every safeguard we could think of, reinforced every system, every lock, every wall. But it didn't need to escape. It just needed to wait. The first time the lights flickered, I thought it was a glitch. The second time, I wasn't so sure. By the third, the air in the chamber felt wrong again. That same alive feeling. Like the room wasn't a room anymore, like it had become part of the Apex. The decision came down from command. Escalate containment measures, as if building thicker walls and adding more locks would make a difference. They sent in drones, testing for structural weaknesses, checking every corner for signs of tampering. There was nothing. The Apex hadn't moved in days, but it was there, in the silence, in the way the air seemed to hum without making a sound. The drones didn't find anything unusual, but that didn't stop them from failing. One by one, their systems shut down, not destroyed, not damaged, just empty. Like whatever made them work had been pulled out, piece by piece. That's when the dreams started. Not for everyone, just the ones who spent the most time near the chamber. I had one too. In the dream, I wasn't myself. I was something else, something I couldn't recognize, standing in a place I couldn't describe. There were no walls, no floor, no sky, just endless black. And in the middle of it all, the Apex, not moving, not making a sound, but somehow louder than anything I'd ever heard. I woke up shaking, and I wasn't the only one. Every time someone had the dream, they described it differently. But one thing was always the same. The apex was there, and it was watching. That's when I started to wonder if we'd ever really contained it at all. The day we lost the first person to the apex was the day we understood we were never in control. It wasn't a handler or a technician this time. It was someone from command, a senior officer named Marshall. He wasn't supposed to be anywhere near the chamber, but he wanted to see the progress for himself. He walked into the observation room like he owned the place, barely glanced at the monitors, and made some sarcastic comment about how the apex wasn't as scary as the reports made it sound. The apex didn't move, didn't growl, didn't do anything. Marshall leaned closer to the glass, tapping it like he was taunting a caged animal, and then it happened. Not quickly, not violently, but deliberately. The apex tilted its head just slightly, and Marshall stopped talking. At first I thought he was just startled. Then he started coughing, soft at first, then harder, until he was on his knees, clutching his throat. We called for medics, shouting through the comms, but he was already gone by the time they arrived. His body wasn't just still. It was wrong. His skin looked stretched, like something had pulled it taut from the inside. And his face, I don't think I'll ever forget the look in his eyes. They weren't his anymore. After that, everything fell apart. The apex still hadn't moved from its spot, but it didn't need to. It was controlling us, pushing us toward the edge without lifting a finger. The dreams got worse, more vivid, more invasive. People started waking up screaming, clutching at their heads like they were trying to claw something out. A few of them didn't wake up at all. They just lay there, breathing but empty, their bodies alive, but their minds, whatever made them, gone. The silence around the chamber became unbearable. You'd think silence would feel peaceful, but it wasn't. It was loud, pressing down on us, filling the spaces where sound should have been. People stopped talking unless they had to. Even then, their voices sounded distant, hollow, like they were trying not to attract attention. I started avoiding the observation room altogether. It didn't matter, though. The apex was in my head now, in all of our heads. We could feel it, even when we weren't near it. One night, I couldn't sleep. The dreams had been getting worse, but that wasn't what kept me up. It was the feeling that something was missing. I walked the corridors, trying to shake the unease, but it only got worse. The station was too quiet, too empty. When I'd finally worked up the nerve to check the security feeds, my stomach dropped. The cameras around the chamber were down, every single one. I ran to the control room, half expecting to find it deserted. It wasn't. Everyone was there, staring at the main monitor like they couldn't look away. The feed was back, but it wasn't showing the chamber anymore. It was showing us, the control room, from the exact angle we were standing at. It didn't make sense. There were no cameras in here, but there it was, clear as day. And in the corner of the screen, barely visible, was the apex. It was still in the chamber, but it was watching us. Watching me. Then the feed cut to black. I don't remember much after that, just panic. Alarms blaring. People shouting over each other, trying to figure out what was happening. I think someone tried to override the system, but nothing worked. The station felt smaller, like the walls were closing in. And the apex, it wasn't just in the chamber anymore. It was everywhere. By the time we realized the apex had control, it was too late. The station wasn't ours anymore. It wasn't even a place anymore, not really. It had become part of something bigger, something we didn't understand. The air felt thicker, charged with a tension that made every breath harder than the last. We were trapped, not by walls or locks, but by the apex itself. And it was patient. It didn't need to attack us. It just waited for us to break. The first sign came when people started disappearing. Not all at once, not even in obvious ways. Someone would step out for a moment, maybe to check a system or grab something from storage, and they wouldn't come back. At first, we thought they'd gotten lost. The station was huge, and the stress was messing with our heads. But when we tried to track their movements, there was nothing. No camera footage, no logs, no traces. It was like they'd been erased. The survivors, if you could even call us that, huddled together in the control room trying to make sense of it. Every plan we came up with fell apart before we could even start. Communication systems were dead. The escape pods were locked down, sealed by a system that no longer responded to our commands. Someone suggested going to the chamber facing the apex directly, but no one was willing to move. We didn't say it out loud, but we all knew the truth. It didn't matter where we went. The apex was already with us. The dreams got worse. They weren't just dreams anymore, they were instructions. At least that's what they felt like. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, my head pounding, with this overwhelming urge to go somewhere, to do something. I didn't know what, but the pull was almost impossible to resist. A few people couldn't fight it. They left in the middle of the night, silent and determined, their eyes blank. We never saw them again. And then there was the noise. It started as a low hum, barely noticeable, like the sound of a distant engine. But it grew louder, more insistent, until it was all we could hear. It wasn't coming from the walls or the systems, it was coming from inside us. At first it was just a vibration in my chest, a faint rhythm that didn't belong. But as the hours passed, it spread, crawling into my head, my limbs, my thoughts. It was inescapable, like it was rewriting me piece by piece. One of the technicians, Mara, snapped. She started shouting at the walls, accusing them of whispering to her, of laughing at her. No one tried to stop her. We all felt the same way, even if we weren't saying it. She grabbed a wrench and smashed one of the consoles, screaming that she wouldn't let it take her. The noise didn't stop. It got louder, and then she did. 2. She stopped mid-swing, her face slack, her eyes wide. She stood there for a moment, perfectly still, before turning and walking toward the chamber. We tried to stop her. I swear we tried, but she didn't even react. It was like she couldn't hear us anymore. She stepped through the doors and they sealed behind her. We watched on the monitors, frozen, as she approached the apex. It still hadn't moved. But as Mara got closer, her body changed. It wasn't obvious at first, just small things. Her posture, the way she walked. But then her skin started to ripple, like something beneath it was shifting, trying to get out. She reached the apex and stopped, standing perfectly still in front of it. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the monitors cut to static. When they came back, Mara was gone. The apex was still there, exactly where it had been before, but now there was something different about it. It wasn't just watching us anymore. It was waiting. The final hours on the station blurred together, a mix of fear, confusion, and the overwhelming sense that we were no longer ourselves. Whatever was happening, it wasn't just around us. It was inside us, pulling us apart from within. The apex didn't need to kill us. It was changing us, reshaping us into something we couldn't comprehend. The hum grew louder, no longer just a sound, but a presence, pressing into every corner of the station. The walls seemed to pulse with it, almost like they were alive. We stopped trying to fight it. What was the point? Every system was dead, every escape route blocked, and every attempt to regain control ended the same way. Silence. Not the kind you notice, but the kind that notices you. That silence, the weight of it, was worse than the noise. And then the chamber doors opened. No alarms, no warnings, just the hiss of hydraulics as the seals released. We didn't want to look. We didn't need to. We already knew what was waiting for us. But curiosity, or maybe something else, drew us in. One by one, we turned toward the monitors, toward the cameras that still worked. The apex was gone. The chamber was empty. But it wasn't empty. The walls shimmered faintly as if they were coated in oil, reflecting shapes that shouldn't have been there. Shadows stretched and twisted, moving in ways that made no sense. And in the center of it all, there was a mark, a symbol burned into the floor. It wasn't from any language we knew, but it felt familiar, like it had always been there, waiting for us to notice. That's when the voices started. Not loud, not overwhelming, but clear. They didn't come from the speakers or the walls or even the air. They came from us, from inside our own heads. They weren't commands. They weren't even words, really. Just thoughts, impressions, images. A galaxy in flames, 1,000 civilizations reduced to ash, and always the apex standing at the center of it all. I don't know who moved first. Maybe it was me, maybe it was all of us at once. But somehow we ended up in the corridor outside the chamber. The air was different here, colder, sharper. Every step felt heavier, like we were walking through something alive. The hum was deafening now, but we didn't stop. We couldn't. The chamber door was wide open, and beyond it the symbol burned brighter, pulsing in time with the noise. And then we saw it. Not the apex, not as we'd known it. This was something else, something larger, something infinite. Its form was impossible, shifting between shapes, between dimensions, between ideas. It didn't look at us. It didn't need to. We were already a part of it. Someone screamed. I don't know who. The sound barely registered against the noise. The apex, or whatever it had become, wasn't just watching us anymore. It was inside us, weaving itself into our thoughts, our memories, our very being. I could feel it pulling at me, unraveling everything I was, everything I'd ever been. And in that moment, I understood. The apex wasn't a predator. It wasn't a monster. It was a seed planted in the heart of humanity, waiting to grow. And we had nurtured it, fed it, given it everything it needed to become something more, something unstoppable. The last thing I remember is the light, blinding, searing, endless. It wasn't coming from the chamber. It was coming from us. The apex had become us. Or maybe we had become it. Either way, there was no difference anymore. No station, no team, no humans, just the apex stretching out into the void, into the galaxies beyond, into everything. And it was hungry.